Hey, this is Felicia from Flickr Film, and this week's video is all about exposures. There's lots of different methods of getting a good exposure. There's light meters, there's histograms, there's waveforms, there's zebras, there's false color. But which is best? Well, that can kind of depend on the situation that you're using it in. Some cameras have multiple methods, some only have just one, so it also depends on the camera you're using, I guess. For example, my Sony FS7 has waveforms, zebra, and histogram, but it doesn't have false color. However, a camera like an old broadcast camera might only just have zebra. And something like the Arri Mini might have all of the above. The original and best method of getting the exact exposure you're after is by using a light meter. There are many different types of brands of light meters. Mine is a Sekonic L758 Cine Digital Master. I think it's just called Cine D for short. I really like this one because it has the ability to program in different cameras. So you can put in camera profiles. Some of them you can find online, some of them you can program in yourself. Light meters can be used to gather information about your lighting ratios. That is the difference between the key side and the fill side. Keeping a lighting ratio while you're shooting is pretty important. It also helps if you have to reshoot a scene or if you're using that particular lighting ratio over the whole shoot. That's what I tend to use this for on set. So if I have a particular lighting ratio that I want to keep to for the whole shoot, I will check one side of the face, let's just say the fill side, and let's say that comes to 4, and then I'll check the key side of the face, and maybe that comes to 5, 6, I don't know. Let's say there's one stop difference between them both. So now I know that there is one stop difference between either side of the face. My lighting ratio is going to be that, so I try to keep that consistent throughout the whole shoot. I'm planning on doing another video about lighting ratios, so stay tuned for that one. Their main purpose though is to take a light reading so that you know what you're exposing to. So for instance, like in our other example, let's just say I checked this side of my face. Right now it's coming to 11, but let's just say it came to 4. So if this side is 4 and then the other side of my face is 2.8, there's one stop difference between them both. So that means if I expose my camera, change my f-stop to 4, I have exposed correctly for this side of the face. And then the other side will be one stop under. I'm happy with that. If you wanted to bring more light in this side to make it more even, that's fine, that's up to you. But if I'm happy with one stop under, that's okay as well, because this is the side that's most important to me. This is the side I am exposing for. There's one more thing on this light meter that I would like to show you, which is really handy. It is the spot meter. So on the side here is a little eyepiece. All you have to do, swing it to the spot meter, and now this becomes inactive and this becomes active. I can look through the peep and I can select an area, let's just say in the corner of this room. I hit the trigger and boom, I've got a reading. So I know exactly what the stop is in that corner of the room. That's super handy if you are on a set where you can't quite get to the action to get a reading. And let's just say you need to take a reading of somebody's face while they're sitting on a bed, but there's so many things in the way and you don't have time to get over and get in there and get the light reading using the sphere. You can just use the spot meter, and that should give you an accurate enough reading to make an adjustment to your camera in order to expose correctly for them. And there goes the sun. Today is a Melbourne day. It was pouring down with rain this morning and now it's quite sunny outside, but the sun keeps disappearing. Predominantly, the light meter was used when we were shooting on 16 and 35mm. So it was incredibly handy because you needed to know exactly how to expose for your film so it doesn't come out muddy and grainy and just gross. So it isn't really used anymore, but I really like to have it on set, especially for lighting ratios. It's absolutely perfect for that. You'll actually notice there's a very similar analog light meter in the bottom of your 35mm camera, or it could be on the side. It'll actually show you what stop to set your camera to. If you half depress the button, it'll show you how far under or how far over you are, or what stop you need to set it to. And then you adjust accordingly, and when you've got 0, that is when you take your shot. Or alternatively, if it is a stop, you'll set your camera to that stop and then you've got a correct exposure. That's often a representation of the whole image, not really singular spots. It depends on the camera you're using and how many points it uses. In fact, in a basic sense, you could probably use your digital stills camera or your 35mm stills camera to do the same job as this, but I wouldn't recommend that straight away. I'd recommend having a look at your camera and comparing a few things first, doing a few tests, and seeing exactly what the parameters are that you will need to get an accurate reading for when you're actually on set. But not many people use these light meters anymore, and it's simply because there are easier ways of doing things now. One of those ways is zebras. Zebras are one of the first digital methods of getting an exposure. This is that camera setting that displays moving lines where the exposure is set to a certain percentage. So in your settings on the camera, you can change that percentage to, let's just say, what I like to do generally is 70 to 75 for my skin tones and highlights. And then you can also set a second one if your camera allows it. So the second zebra will go over the top of the other zebra, creating a crosshatch pattern. You can set that one to, let's say, 90, and that way anything with that over the top is at 90% white. So it's not going to clip per se, but it is on the verge of it. This ensures that nothing is overexposed or clipping. I don't mind using zebras in some circumstances, but it's not my favorite method of getting an exposure. However, it is a really easy one to understand. As you can see in this example here, all you have to do is adjust your stop and you can see exactly which sections of the image are 70 or 90 or whatever you've set it to. Onwards to histograms and waveforms. They're both very similar, but oh so different. Histograms display their information vertically on a graph. It's a representation of the image overall. On one side of the graph, you've got pure black, and on the other side of the graph, you've got pure white. Now, what the histogram does is it is measuring how many pixels in the image are related to that tone. So ideally, if you're looking for a correct exposure or a broad exposure, it'll be a nice curve in the middle. Often it doesn't really happen like that. I'm not a massive fan of histograms either, but that's simply because they're often too small on the screen for me to really get a sense of what's going on in the image. It's not an accurate method. Waveforms, one of my favorite methods. They measure horizontally as well in a graph, and they display the data as percentages. Each line horizontally going up the graph is a certain percentage, and then the pixels within that graph represent the image as a whole. So you can almost see the image moving in the graph, which means you can pinpoint exactly where in the frame some sort of exposure is. For instance, if there's a bright window in one corner, I can see in the histogram that, you know, this corner is overexposed, so that must be the window. It's simple as that, it's so easy. The main benchmarks on a waveform are as follows. Depending on what you're monitoring and what your LUT is, whether you're viewing log, Rec 709, or another LUT burnt in, you should check and see where you would like your highlights to sit so you have a smoother grade in post. As a general benchmark, I like to monitor in Rec 709 or Hypergamma 8. It's a setting on my FS7 which I might go into in another video because it's quite complex, but it basically just gives a softer image to Rec 709. It's not as crunched down as Rec 709. It has a little bit of movement that I can use in post, but I can also get away with not grading it at all. When I'm monitoring in 709 or Hypergamma, I like to set my highlights at about 60 to 75%. It really does depend on the situation and what I can get away with. I've then got a lot of movement in post, so I can see that if I'm shooting log footage, it can crunch down to, let's say, highlights are sitting at 50, and then I can unpack that and expand that in the grade, making the whites whiter and the blacks darker. I keep an eye on the 100% line as well, because if I am shooting something and there is something bright in the corner, let's just say like our last example, it was a window. If that window in the corner was blowing out and it was clipping, I would be able to see on the waveform that that is on the 100% line. But maybe there's nothing in the window that I would like to see, and it's not that important. I'm okay with that clipping, I'll just leave it. If not, there are things I can do to change that. I can bring up the light in the room and bring the stop down so that I can start seeing things outside. But I may not have enough light power, so I might just have to change frame. And then that way, I don't have something bright and clipping in my shot, but I still can get a good exposure on whatever else is in the foreground. So the main moral of the story is this all comes with practice. You've just got to work out the exact parameters of your camera and adjust accordingly. Fun fact, you can also use the waveform to see if there's any light flicker if you're doing off-speed work. So you can definitely see in the waveform a slight flickering up and down in exposure. If you can see that, that means there's lighting flicker, so you've got to adjust your lights or your hertz on the camera. Now, false colors, one of my most favorite exposure techniques. It's a highly accurate way of measuring your exposure. Basically, false color is pretty cool. Some monitors have this function, some cameras also have the function. Some cameras don't have it at all, which is a real bummer. And depending on what you're using, the color representation may vary. But in this example, we're using the Arri Mini. Ideally, you want a good mix of pink and green. So pink is one stop over your mid-tone gray, and then the green is just a little bit under. What is mid-grey, I hear you asking? I'm actually quite glad you asked, because it relates to everything I've just been saying, and I could make a really long video just about mid-tone grey. You know what, I probably will, because this is gonna take us a long time. So I'm just gonna give you a basic gist of what exactly mid-tone grey is and what it encompasses in terms of getting your exposure correct. Mid-grey is basically halfway between pure black and pure white. So it's a good method of getting exactly the middle of the spectrum exposure for everything. An almost invaluable tool to have in your set is a mid-tone grey card. I actually don't have one. I should get one. A grey card assists you in finding the mid-tone of your camera, because each camera has a different sensor and therefore has a different gamma curve, or the way that the camera records highlights and shadows. You know what, this is getting really complicated. I'll also cover gamma curves in the other video as well. And I think that's enough information for your Sunday. The sun is disappearing in the sky, so I should probably cut video here. Feel free to leave any questions below if you have any about this video. Also, if you have any suggestions about other videos that you would like to see, feel free to leave those as well. And remember to please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next Sunday.